Alright, so the Eagles got some great news regarding retaining Christian Parker, which is especially important for the secondary. Plus, A.J. Brown weighed in on Kevin Patullo as the new offensive coordinator, and why is he really optimistic? Also, Philly has a few offseason surgeries taking place, with one of those guys about to get a big contract. Meanwhile, Dallas's hopes just continue to be crushed following a retirement announcement. And maybe most importantly, there's actually a way out of the Bryce Huff situation, with a perfect suitor in Atlanta. So let's talk about that and what all it might take to get it done. But first, let's run it. What's up, guys? We are about 2 weeks away from free agency starting, and you can definitely feel the excitement building, especially for one move in particular. Yes, technically there's the Combine first, which begins this Thursday, and we'll get into some of that talk in a bit. But it'd be really nice if Howie Roseman would take care of business with Zack Baun and get a deal done already. Heck, even Nakobe Dean weighed in saying he's hopeful the Birds GM brings back his partner in crime and that he believes Baun will do whatever he needs to in order to make it happen.
Well, what's taking you so long?
Not gonna lie, emotionally, that's where I'm at now. Sure, I've heard these reports or seen these other speculations saying Milton Williams is gonna be the guy over Zack Baun, but that's just crazy. Plus, come on, logically, we all know to trust Howie to get things figured out, even if it doesn't always make sense at first.
We can't be expected to understand him. He's so far above us.
I could totally be off on this, but I really feel like what's going to happen is we're going to wait till free agency starts. Zack Baun probably even is told, go out there, see what your market value is, then come back to us, give us a chance to match, which, again, at that point, Howie Roseman will match it, and he will be an Eagle. I mean, he's the bald eagle after all. So yes, I think that one will get done, and I also expect Cam Jurgens to get a contract extension at some point this offseason. Because for one, Beef Jerky is a warrior, but also the Eagles never like to wait and let rookie contracts play out if they know a dude is in their long-term plans. And seeing how well the 25-year-old did in his first year as a full-time starter at center, it's pretty obvious he's got a future with the Birds. Which, by the way, assuming that they can come to terms on a contract, it would actually free up a little bit of money in terms of what the salary cap is this season. Not anything crazy, but still something. So kudos to Cam, and hopefully that gets done, and also prayers for a speedy recovery. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, Jurgens underwent a back procedure Tuesday in Los Angeles to alleviate nerve pain, with doctors believing a full recovery is expected by July in time for training camp. Again, that's why I say this dude is a warrior, because think about the fact that he gutted it out in the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl with that bad of a back. Oh yeah, also the same could be said for Landon Dickerson, since he was practically playing on one leg late in the playoffs and is now expected to have surgery this offseason as well. Now, not that we're going to hear about every ailment and injury, but it is insanely impressive as you start to hear about some of the things the guys were playing through each and every week.
It's been a tough year. Like, people don't understand. Like, nobody really understand. Like, I say late in the year, man, I had banged my knee real bad, and so I'm getting my knee drained like twice a week, and people don't even know like what going into playing these games, and that's why like I shout out to my teammates, bro, because that was picking up the load in practice, because I really wasn't practicing. I was out there, but I don't really want practicing. I was just playing on Sunday, and the NFC title game, I got healthy, and it was all she wrote after that.
Yeah, I'd say there was a difference in Swole Batman being healthy versus not. I mean, after not putting up much in the first two playoff games, he definitely showed up in a big way against Washington and then Kansas City. Yet while the Super Bowl victory is one none of us are going to forget, AJ recently elaborated more on his Instagram post, saying he already missed the grind like 2 days after getting a ring, saying he doesn't drink, smoke, or party, so it kind of felt weird to him being in the locker room where it was going nuts. Now still, be that as it may, it's not like he wasn't hyped to celebrate with the guys, but it didn't take long for him to realize that it's the grind and competition that fuels him the most. And man, I'll just say this, I absolutely respect that mindset, so how about we give a little bit of support for the dude who's always open? Just do me a favor, drop a like on this video, make sure you're subscribed, and then go down to the comment section and tell me your favorite AJ Brown play from this past season. Because on my next live stream, I'm going to select one lucky subscriber of the channel to win a signed full-size helmet from Swole Batman. By the way, sticking with AJ real quick, we heard from other guys about the new hire of Kevin Patullo to OC, but it was nice to hear from number 11.
They need to understand everything has to change. I know we just won, but it has to change. We have to get better, and we have to do things different. But I truly feel like it's a great hire. He already has been involved in almost everything. Him, Kellen, and Nick basically called the plays already. So it's a great hire, and he's already familiar with us. We have a great relationship, and he knows what we need to work on, because he's been there, and he's been there for a while. And like I said, he's already been a part of all the situations and the conversations and everything. So I think it's a great hire.
I should also bring this up because I'm not going to play the whole interview clip, but AJ made a great point saying, look, because we won the Super Bowl, we have to evolve this offense. And the best news to all this is that he believes Kevin Patullo is the guy to do that. So there you go. Just for those of you saying it's going to be the same lethargic, stagnant, predictable offense, AJ says it's not. I know, time will tell, and who really knows? Yet the fact that AJ is giving his vote of confidence, and this is a team that's battle-tested, knows what it takes to get the job done, and has learned from 2023, I don't know about you, but makes me a whole lot more confident in this situation than compared to the Brian Johnson one. Granted, I've talked about that one a lot recently, so we're going to keep it moving. Although the good news about a guy who won't be moving is Eagles defensive back coach Christian Parker, after the insiders shared that Kellen Moore, unsurprisingly, officially hired Brandon Staley as his defensive coordinator. Meaning most importantly for us, that Christian Parker is back for at least one more year to shape and mold Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, and the rest of the secondary.
I don't know about you, but I take comfort in that. It's good knowing he's out there.
Okay, so while we have some comfort in a vital piece returning, the Dallas Cowboys lost another one, as Pro Bowl guard Zack Martin announced his retirement earlier this week. And I'm not going to lie, but I respect Martin, especially with real recognizing real and telling Jalen Carter in his rookie season that he's a beast. Also, it's honestly crazy that the 34-year-old will now end his career with more All-Pro selections 9 than accepted holding penalties 7. So anyway, salute to him, and Dallas's problems of trying to stop the Philly pass rush just got more difficult. And yes, I say that even knowing that sure, it's very likely both Josh Sweat and Milton Williams don't return based on the estimated deals they're going to get. However, the more intriguing storyline that's begun to surface is that there's a legit possibility that Howie Roseman could trade Bryce Huff, with multiple outlets sharing the belief that Roseman will almost certainly be looking to trade Agent Zero. It's just, convincing the right team to trade for him.
Something just came across my desk, John. It is perhaps the best thing I've seen in the last 6 months.
Something about a guy who was a healthy and active for the Super Bowl with a backloaded $51 million contract doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of value there. Although this is where things get interesting, because the Atlanta Falcons are rumored to be buyers, and either way are definitely in need of some serious pass rush help. Now I get it though, why on earth would they be considering a dude like Huff after the season he had? Except maybe the biggest element to consider is that Huff's former defensive coordinator with the New York Jets, Jeff Ulbrich, is now the defensive coordinator for the Falcons. So therefore, it's not all that ridiculous to think that maybe Ulbrich sees Huff's past season, knowing the wrist injury he had, and I don't know, might not have been used the best way to highlight his strengths and believes he can help him return to form. Look, regardless of how you feel, reminder that over 17 games in 2023, Huff had 10 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, and 21 quarterback hits in Ulbrich's defense. Plus, in case you don't recall, back when Huff was exploring teams for free agency last year, the Atlanta Falcons were one of the teams trying to sign him. Now look, this is a situation here where, sure, could he be back? Absolutely. Howie may not be able to go and find a trade, but honestly, you're not going to get a whole lot of compensation for him anyway, so if you can get, I don't know, maybe next year a mid-round pick for him, that is more than adequate. And by the way, for those wondering, if Philly was able to execute a trade post-June 1 with Huff, they'd get an additional $4.3 million in salary cap space. Honestly, this is a move that we've all been saying Howie needs to make. Does it happen? How likely? I don't know, but I'm just curious to hear from you guys. How much compensation-wise would you be willing to either get or give up, I guess, to get rid of Bryce Huff? Of course, having asked you that and being the hot topic, I had to get Eagles writer Anthony DiBona on to share his thoughts about an interesting potential trade there and everything else around the birds.
Several angles that we'll get into here, but just in general, first off, likelihood of Howie potentially figuring out a different home maybe for Bryce Huff?
It's just, they're in a weird spot. It kind of reminds me of the James Bradbury situation last season where he also signed a 3-year deal that was kind of coming off a bad performance in the first year of the deal, and now the Eagles are kind of stuck in the same situation with Bryce Huff. So financially, it really doesn't make much sense for any team to kind of trade for him before June 1st. And even after June 1st, the Eagles are going to have to eat a lot of dead cap. So it'll be interesting to see what they do there.
Yeah, that's I think everyone is, and it goes kind of back and forth. If you make this move, or you're able to find a move, you almost have to say, hey, we're willing to take on some of the contract, because it seems like there's not really necessarily going to be a group that says, hey, just apples for apples, let's swap it, let's take on that player. But the hope would be maybe you can move on from him. Granted, he injured his wrist, tore the wrist ligament. That can throw some things off. Learning a new system with Vic Fangio. But there just might not be the best fit here. I think that a lot of us have seen that. There's, when you're putting your healthy, at that time, I guess, by that point, your healthy pass rusher who's $51 million contract inactive for the Super Bowl, that kind of tells you all you need to know. Is there a better suitor for him, perhaps? Again, all the hypotheticals out of the way, I suppose, but is there a better suitor that you see for Bryce Huff?
The one that I keep looking at is the Atlanta Falcons because it seems like they've been missing an elite edge rusher for years. And I know Bryce Huff looked far from elite in Philadelphia last season, but Jeff Ulbrich, who is their new defensive coordinator, who was the defensive coordinator of the Jets when Bryce Huff had a couple great seasons there, he's in Atlanta now. So I feel like that would be a perfect fit for him if they're willing to kind of work out some type of compensation. Like I said, I don't know if getting something done before the draft is possible, but a little bit later in the offseason, I think something that would be interesting is that Atlanta is home to two younger pass rushers that the Eagles have actually hosted on top 30 visits back ahead of the 2022 NFL draft, and D'Angelo Malone and Arnold Ebiketie. Both of them have kind of underwhelmed relatively in Atlanta. Ebiketie has had like 6.5 sacks or so last season. Malone really has been essentially a no-show for Atlanta. So maybe kind of a player-for-player deal, or even if the Eagles have to add in a late future day 3 pick to kind of get Atlanta to accept that money and whatever they'll have to eat in this contract. And considering that both of those players are heading into the final year of their rookie deal, maybe they're not a fit for Ulbricht's defense, and it would be worth the swap to see how it works for both sides.
That's interesting. That is a unique thought there, because I was going to ask you, compensation-wise, what you might think. I mean, you kind of go into it of a mid-round pick, potentially add that in with a player, obviously Bryce Huff, because they are taking on the contract. If you were to guess, I mean, your best guess scenario here, say they're trying to move Bryce Huff, I mean, what does it take? If it's just trying, hey, here's Bryce Huff, does Atlanta, if it's a player in that sense, or even if it's not, how much draft capital potentially do you think Howie Roseman has to give up?
I mean, if it's going to be this year before the draft, which like I said, I still don't think that would happen because of the amount of money the Eagles have to eat. They don't have a 6th or 7th round pick. So it would probably have to be one of their 5th round picks. They have 3 of those that they're scheduled to make right now, but in the future, maybe it could be a later pick, or I know in future years, they sometimes count that as a little bit less of a value. So maybe they'll have to give up a future 4th round pick. It's certainly not an ideal situation. I mean, they might end up having to just keep him on the roster and see if he can do anything now if he's healthy under Vic Fangio for another season. But yeah, it's definitely not a great situation for Philadelphia to be in.
You'd love for Bryce Huff to have, made more of a difference or more optimism. We're not saying that he can't, obviously, because, he could turn things around next year if he's still remaining in Philly. There is another scenario out there, maybe a couple, but another scenario that you actually texted me to kind of put on the radar in a sense, because I hadn't seen it previously, but chance for maybe a new tight end, an avenue there for a trade involving Bryce Huff?
So I'm not going to take any credit for this one. I actually saw Zach Berman and Bo Wolf talking about it on the PHLY show, but they had mentioned the possibility of the Eagles potentially moving on from Dallas Goedert this offseason, given his age. He's 30 years old, and he can't really stay healthy. And then the fact that the Falcons, they are familiar with Bryce Huff. The Eagles want to move off the contract, and they happen to have a certain Philadelphia native that's kind of underperformed at tight end, and that's Kyle Pitts. So if they could potentially work out some type of deal, I think they had mentioned a 3rd round pick with Bryce Huff for Kyle Pitts. I think that would be great. Obviously for the Eagles, you bring in a young tight end that they would have to sign to an extension, but his ceiling is unbelievable. He hasn't really hit in the NFL just yet, but bring him into Philadelphia alongside Saquon Barkley, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown. I mean, obviously Jalen Hurts. The possibilities would be endless in this offense. You bring him back home to Philadelphia. That would be really fun. I just don't know if it would actually be feasible unless the Eagles really want to pony up as far as draft compensation goes.
And we've seen what Howie does, obviously, with the draft picks over the last 4 years. You could argue that he's been 12 for 12 in the draft, maybe 11 for 12. Some people are like, there's one potential we might throw out there. But either way, 11 for 12, 12 for 12 on your first 3 draft picks for the past 4 drafts. Not as likely to give up something there, although it would be, I don't know, kind of weird, strange in a full circle type of way that you get a compensation or trade compensation for Hassan Reddick and then somehow have to give that back up for a team to be willing to take Bryce Huff. But, maybe something works out there. There's crazier things. We've seen NFL trades and the way that Howie can pull one over on other teams, but I don't know. There's lots of other potentials, but you have not necessarily just Atlanta. That's the maybe hot topic for teams that might consider Bryce Huff, but a few other teams, perhaps, not just Atlanta?
Yeah, so another team that I would focus on is another guy that's familiar with Bryce Huff from his time with the Jets is That's Robert Saleh, who returned to the 49ers this offseason as their DC. And they have Nick Bosa, obviously, who's an unbelievable pass rusher. But outside of that, they have Leonard Floyd, who's 32, and there are reports that he might be a cut candidate. So if San Francisco is looking to kind of bring in another guy along the edge that's familiar with Saleh's defense, Bryce Huff would obviously be a fit. He praised them a ton when he was there in New York. And then kind of going back to 2000 when he first started his career with the Jets, he signed as an undrafted free agent. Two of the coaches on the defensive coaching staff now are still around in the NFL. You have Andre Carter, who was the Jets defensive line coach back in 2020, and now he's a pass rush specialist for the Raiders. So the Raiders, outside of Max Crosby, they don't really have a ton of guys on the edge to look for. So maybe Bryce Huff could land there. And then Frank Bush, who was the Jets defensive coordinator in 2020, he's now the linebacker coach with the Titans, who's another team that doesn't have a ton of talent on the edge. So just a couple of different landing spots for potentially Bryce Huff if the Eagles do want to move on for him at some point.
Okay. Well, there you go. So keep an eye out for people curious and wondering if I asked you, because it feels like there's always some sort of prediction whenever you come on the show. But if I were to ask you percentage chance that the Eagles move on and find a way to move on from Bryce Huff, would you have a specific percentage guess there?
I mean, not just because that's my idea, but I really do like that scenario where they do the player for player swap, maybe a little bit later in the offseason, around like June or so, after OTAs, but before training camp for D'Angelo Malone or Arnold Ebiketie. Especially Malone, I think Atlanta probably be a little bit more willing to let go of him heading into the last year of his rookie deal, and he hasn't really done much in Atlanta. I think Ulbrich would like to have Bryce Huff back there and help implement his defense in Atlanta, and I think it's kind of a very Howie Roseman-esque move to like take a chance on a guy, even though he has to eat the money. It gives him a chance to kind of have a young guy on his rookie deal. Howie Roseman loves underperforming players on rookie contracts. We've seen him add a bunch to the practice squad over the years, but if it means to eat money and then bring in somebody that Vic Fangio might like a little bit more on the edge, I think they could see them doing that.
Okay. Didn't get a percentage for that.
Okay.
But
I honestly, I don't think I'd go with like a 20% chance of Bryce Huff getting traded, only because the amount of money they have to eat is just unreal. I think they kind of just hold on to him for another year, see if he has anything to offer at all, and then just see what happens. Because even after June 1st, it's still quite a big cap hit for the Eagles. They're almost better off just seeing if they can get anything going off the edge for him.
We should also mention, too, just speaking of defensive line, I'm in agreement with you again, just the fact that, it doesn't feel likely. But there's no concern, because I got a few DMs about this of Nolan Smith tearing his triceps, which did happen in the Super Bowl. We got to remember, Brandon Graham was able to come back in 10 or 11 weeks. Now, you're not asking Nolan to come back that quickly, but had surgery this past Wednesday. Everything's fine. Expected to rehab, be perfectly fine, good to go, no setbacks or anything like that. So there's no concerns there. But then immediately I started getting some people who are just like, hey, is this a big deal? It's like, we're in February. We got a little bit of time here for him to recover, more so than Brandon Graham, although it is kind of hilarious because he's following in Brandon Graham's footsteps in every way possible. So shout out to my guy, showing up big. Playing through that is insane. I can't imagine what that would feel like, because he continued on. He tore his triceps and still is like, I'm going out there because, lo and behold, like we said, Bryce Huff was inactive for the games. You're low on edge rushers to begin with. But it can't be much worse for what Bryce Huff did this past season. So, again, not necessarily giving up on it, but I think as of right now, regardless of if Bryce Huff is still, it's going to be Nolan Smith on one edge and probably Jalix Hunt on the other. Those would be my predictions. So we'll see.
My guy, I'll take it. I mean, at this point, I don't know what's more impressive: the fact that Nolan Smith played through, like in the Super Bowl, played through that injury and kept going, or his performance at the parade where he was just having the time of his life, putting kids on his shoulders, and he didn't look like he had a messed up tricep there either. No. So I don't know which one's more impressive.
There's a lot of ways to kind of subdue pain, and one of those was certainly being taken to the parade. So nobody knew about it. That's for sure. It was pretty hilarious. The fact that he didn't remember basically anything. It kind of admitted that on his social media account. So understandably so, because you could kind of see it in his face as he's getting highlights, and then has to get the escort out to be like, okay, we're done here, good to go. But it was pretty hilarious. We should still, though, getting to other news and ramifications, because people are curious. Naturally, we still talk about the defensive line, whether it is a Bryce Huff moving on, whether you're trying to get some other guys through the draft, or other trades altogether. We can get into Myles Garrett a little bit because that's continually been brought up. You mentioned Max Crosby a second ago, and of course people would go, "Hey, but Max Crosby to Philly, right? Like there's a possibility there. How do you trade for that side?" Do you think there's and I'm going to say legit. I don't necessarily know how I quantify what that means necessarily because nothing's impossible with how. Do you think there's a legit chance Myles Garrett could be a Philadelphia Eagle next season?
I mean, I'm never going to say never, especially after my 0.0% Saquon Barkley prediction, but it feels like there will be kind of a lot of like loops to jump through or hoops to jump through for the Eagles because there are probably other teams around the NFL that might have a little bit more to offer in terms of draft compensation or even player compensation, because a lot of the scenarios I see that people are like throwing either Jalen Hunt in the mix in a trade or Nolan Smith in a trade along with a first-round pick or multiple first-round picks. And I just don't know if the Eagles are really in a position, given all the money they have upcoming that they have to spend on the cap and players that they still have to pay, that I don't know if bringing in a guy like Myles Garrett is really feasible from that standpoint. But I mean, I never rule out Howie Roseman doing anything because especially given the fact that Myles Garrett is saying that he wants to compete for a championship. I mean, he openly talked about the Eagles, how it would be a great destination, and they're literally coming off winning a Super Bowl. So you can't get any closer to like a Super Bowl contending team than that. And they're going to have a need on the edge given the likely departure of Josh Sweat, I would say, even a guy like Milton Williams who played a little bit on the edge or inside on the edge as well. So like he would fit in well. Myles Garrett can play up and down the defensive line. He's a game wrecker, like even in a different world he's in a world of his own. I mean, what that guy can do. So if there's even the slightest bit of chance to get him, I think Howie Roseman's going to try it, but I just don't know how feasible it is.
I definitely think that he'll, and I agree with. I definitely think that he'll call, right? Because he's going to call regardless. Just see, hey, well, let's see what the asking price is. But I think there's interest. We've seen some things back during the trade deadline, and also it goes back to actually a little part that I was going to insert for Bryce Huff. There were rumors that Howie was trying to trade Bryce Huff at the last trade deadline. So for those going like, no, he's not. He was trying to last year. He's going to try to do it. The question is, is the team actually interested to pay or to get a less of an offer in terms of, getting rid of that player? We'll see. And the same thing for Myles Garrett. So he will call. I don't know. Same deal percentage-wise. It feels very unlikely. Nothing is impossible like you're saying there. Does it help in any way? Because I've had some questions on this also. The salary cap has increased. It's I don't know if its official numbers come out yet, somewhere around 277 of the NFL now going to be looking at the Nielsen ratings. They're not just based on the television, but also for streaming services. So naturally, you can imagine that that's going to probably skyrocket the number of total views and the broadcasting rights. All this other stuff will increase revenue like 2028, 2029. And the way that the Eagles continue to backload contracts is certainly, a way they do business and helps maybe from that standpoint. But does it massively impact things? Do you think that's a kind of pushing it over the edge, so to speak, to get a player like Myles Garrett and or keep these other free agents that they have? Or how big of a deal is that?
I don't think it changes too much because obviously it's an extra $5 million or so for the rest of the teams in the NFL too. So it's not like it gives just the Eagles an advantage. I think their plan going into this offseason, it's just they've already mentioned it, both Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman, how they're ready to kind of play the comp pick game where they're going to lose. They know they're going to lose a couple of guys to relatively big deals in free agency, and they're probably their biggest moves are going to be re-signings. They're probably going to bring back Zack Baun. I mean, maybe they'll bring back Mekhi Becton, but I would fully expect guys like Josh Sweat and Milton Williams to walk in free agency. And if that's the case, and they only sign like minimum guys or close to minimum guys, then they could be looking at getting a couple extra third-round picks or so in next year's draft, which would be huge. So I don't think they're going to be huge players in free agency. I think it'll be more so Howie Roseman either working the trade market or adding guys after the deadline where they won't count towards the compensatory pick formula like we've seen them do in other offseasons. So I really don't think that $5 million really changes much for them. If anything, they might use it to help them kind of re-sign guys like Cam Jurgens or extend guys where now they can have a little bit more money impacted this year instead of carrying it in future years like they did with other deals.
It definitely makes sense. Cam's going to get his. Shout out to Cam with the back surgery, playing through that. That's crazy. Landon Dickerson on one leg. So all these injuries, all these things that you didn't know about till after the season, it's incredible, miraculous to see what they are, but a true warrior in terms of the O-line. Still, though, sticking with different ways for Howie to tackle this thing. And This is, you should be following Anthony, by the way, if you're not. Most people are. But if you're not, make sure to follow Anthony at DiBona NFL, because Anthony is one of those sickos in a good way, we're still before the Super Bowl. I got some texts of being like, is it crazy that I'm looking forward to some of this draft stuff? Now, you were obviously very much looking forward to the Super Bowl, but you're still got to get into it because, the draft is only a couple months away. We get the combine next week. But this defensive line depth has been talked about. Daniel Jeremiah said that he sees twice as many starters as he saw in last year's draft. And it does set up kind of beautifully if you're Philly, because you're going like, all right, we might lose Milton Williams, might lose Josh Sweat, could replenish with this defensive line. But I'm curious what you've taken a look at, knowing where Philly's at. We'll have more of, the top 30 visits and all that closer to the draft time. But who are a couple options on that D-line that people need to keep their eye out for and maybe an opportunity for Philly?
So I've got 3 names here, and I feel like they're maybe slightly different ranges, but I kind of wanted to give the people different names to look on at different points of the draft. So I feel like the first one is kind of a popular name, especially among Eagles fans, because he's drawn some comparisons to Jalen Carter, and that's going to be Walter Nolan from Ole Miss. He's a former number 1 overall recruit in high school. His potential is through the roof. I mean, his stats aren't the craziest, but when you watch him play, it kind of looks a lot like Jalen Carter, the way he just moves guys out of the way, his explosiveness, his quickness. It's just, I don't know if he's necessarily going to be in the Eagles range, but if Howie Roseman does kind of want to move up, or I've tweeted it out, and I hate that people say this guy will never fall to this team, because if you look at this point, basically last season or the year before, when Nolan Smith had that unreal performance in the combine, people were like, oh, I guess the Eagles got to take him in the first half of the draft because he's no way he's going to make it to 30. And then sure enough, he made it to 30. So, I mean, you can never really say or
people
rule
said you had to
things out
trade up for Quinyon Mitchell too. I mean,
yes, exactly.
All those guys.
Nobody would have thought you can get Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. It was the stuff that the Eagles have. Nobody thought Nakobe Dean would be there in the 3rd round.
Yeah.
The things that they've been able to do, Keely Ringo in the 4th. I could just go on and on. None of these things people thought were feasible a month or 2 ahead of the draft. So I don't like ruling anybody out definitely, but Walter Nolan is a guy that definitely could be intriguing for the Eagles if he is there. Another guy that's kind of rising up draft boards, and speaking of Quinyon Mitchell, he's his former teammate from Toledo, Darius Alexander. He had an incredible performance at the Senior Bowl. He's almost 6'4", 304 pounds, but he was lining up as a stand-up edge rusher at the Senior Bowl in a wide 9. The things he can do, you talk about versatility, he can really do it all. The only downside is he's going to be 24 years old, or is 24 years old already. So, I mean, people kind of get scared off by that, but I think he's going to put on an absolute show at the combine, and I think his stock's only going to go up from there. And then another guy, this is a much later round pick. I mean, he's kind of in the early day 3. Some people have him late day 3, but Howard Cross III from Notre Dame. New Jersey native. His dad played for the Giants. He's smaller. He's only 6'1", 288 or so, but he just plays with a nonstop motor. You talk about a guy like Moro Wajomo, he's a little bit bigger, but he just plays with that effort. And the kind of, even Nolan Smith, these guys just their motor is just nonstop. And Howard Cross III kind of reminds me of that mold, where he's just going to keep trying, and he's kind of battled out through his whole career. He was a big part of that Notre Dame defense, and now we'll see what he can do in the NFL.
There we go. A couple names to keep an eye out. This is what I always love, because people that don't necessarily maybe have time to watch these guys go through potential prospects that the Eagles can consider and to keep an eye on for not only, now the combine, but as we lead up into the draft. The combine is so great, though, because of, you get to see the physical tools, the athleticism, the testing, things like that. Now, it's not the end-all, be-all, but for an organization like the Eagles, I think most people know this, certainly by now, but Howie Roseman loves to go after and draft players that are very high in that athleticism score. So you look back at basically all the last drafts, and that's usually the case, especially early on with the picks that he's made. So I think back to all the way last year when we recorded, I'm like, hey, just give us a couple names. You gave us several. The one that stuck out was Johnny Wilson. You're like, that dude's a unicorn. Just wait. It's going to be ridiculous. It's kind of cool that he ended up going to Philly, but that was a year ago. So same thing here. For people that have not maybe been as tuned in, or who they should be following with the combine coming up next week, who are maybe a couple names on both sides of the ball that you think could impress, or certainly to keep an eye out?
So I'm going to stay on the defensive side of the ball. I'm going to start off there. So James Pierce Jr., who's another guy that might be outside of the Eagles' range, but just a freak athlete. He plays on the edge at Tennessee. He hit 23 miles per hour in an actual game on a pick 6 against Iowa at 6'5", 245 pounds. I mean, that's just ridiculous. He reportedly runs in the 4.4s for his 40-yard dash. So, I mean, any chance of the Eagles potentially getting him, I know I already said I don't like ruling things out, but he's probably going to be a top 15 pick when it's all said and done. There are questions. Supposedly he has some off-the-field issues, but we've seen that the Eagles aren't necessarily scared of that either. So if he does fall just because of the talent that he has, the athleticism, that he might be a target for the Eagles, especially after what I predict will be a massive performance at the Combine. And then another guy he's been drawing comparisons to Kyle Hamilton is South Carolina safety Nick Emanwari. He's a freak of nature, 6'3", 227 pounds, playing safety, but he was on Bruce Feldman's freak list before the season. 11 foot 4-inch broad jump, 42-inch vertical jump, 24 reps of 225 pounds, and he was also clocked at running close to 23 miles per hour in game. So, I mean, he's another guy that's probably going to be a first-round pick, potentially out of the Eagles' range. But if they do want to take another safety, if they're worried about Reed Blankenship hitting free agency or Chauncey Gardner-Johnson getting an injury or something like that, he would be a phenomenal player to add to Vic Fangio's defense and really add another kind of do-it-all player in the secondary. And then I'm flipping over to the offensive side of the ball along the offensive line with Jeff Stoutland, where he loves his freakish offensive lineman. Everybody knows that. And a guy like Charles Grant, smaller school, William and Mary, he entered college at only 240 pounds, but now he's listed at 6'4.5", 301 pounds. Probably going to move to the interior, but clock that. That's going to be a trend with all these guys. 21 miles per hour during the game, 32-inch vertical, 35-inch arms, and his 10-yard split during training is apparently 1.44 seconds, which would be fast for any position, let alone an offensive lineman. So I'm really excited to see how he tests. And then lastly, you talked about my guy Johnny Wilson last year, and this is basically the closest thing to Johnny Wilson this time around, although he's technically listed as a tight end. So Arondé Gadsden, another guy whose father played in the NFL, tight end Syracuse, played wide receiver, and he was a track athlete in high school, moved to tight end in college, but he was more of like a Mike Gesicki kind of guy where he was mostly in the slot. Almost 65% of the time he was in the slot for Syracuse. So a different type of tight end. He's basically a wide receiver, like I said, but 6'4.25", 247 pounds at the Shrine Bowl. So he's adding weight, and he could reportedly run in the 4.5s, potentially 4.4s. So his tape is really intriguing. He doesn't have the drop problem like a guy like Johnny Wilson did. So I'm really excited to see him run at the Combine.
Okay, there you go. A couple names that might flash. Be checking out there. I always
sorry. I just got way too excited rattling those names.
No,
I'm just so excited for the draft.
I love seeing because I can feel the passion, just coming from the screen. But it's also just the fact that these guys are going to test, and that's really what it's about. They're going to have the athletic testing. They're going to go through some of the interviews. Teams are going to meet with them. We'll get reports back of hey, the Eagles met with so and so, and see how many of those actually translate. And then you might get the top 30 visits as well. But it's an exciting part of the year. I love seeing it. We talked about it, or you mentioned Nolan Smith, right? Whenever he did, it's the things that sometimes you're like, oh, well, okay, that guy's obviously cross him off. There's no way that he could potentially make it. But we've seen crazier things happen in the draft. So you never know. Wouldn't rule it out. And Howie's working his magic. I will be curious because, a lot of it feels like, hey, defensive line, offensive line, maybe you go get your tight end, things like that. But definitely keep an eye out, as you've mentioned multiple times. Top 30 visits, which they will then begin to start releasing, matter a ton, especially for the earlier round picks, because Howie doesn't like to go off script too much. Definitely worth noting, we would say.
Yes, that's just a dead giveaway in recent years. I think it was 9 of their last 17 picks or something like that were top 30 visits over the last 2 years. It's just especially the early guys like Nolan Smith, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, all these guys, Tyler Steen, they've all visited the Eagles for top 30 visits, and most of them are usually reported. So I try and keep track of all of that, and I'll be tweeting them all out as I see them. And it's for a lot of teams, they kind of use it to throw teams off, but for the Eagles, it's just a dead giveaway for who they're interested in.
Just another reason you should be following Anthony if you're not already on Twitter, everywhere else, but at DiBona NFL. Speaking of, you should also be following Anthony because if you were, then you would know about Kevin Patullo more so than whenever it actually got announced for the official offensive coordinator of the Eagles. And you had a couple different articles, but a really good one that was, dispelling some notions or at least giving some more credit and insight, because I think the initial drawback or the initial thought from people as soon as Patullo was announced is like, oh, here we go again. This is 2023. This is Brian Johnson all over again. The offense is going to be in this phase. And I get it from the standpoint of it's internal, close to Sirianni. Are there some similarities? Sure. But, you made a fantastic case. So we haven't actually recorded. We've texted offline and you've shared on tweets and stuff. But curious to get your just quicker thoughts on Kevin Patullo, reasons for optimism, just kind of overall takeaways there.
So yeah, I think it's really interesting that they actually gave him the shot, because I feel like publicly it was going to be something that people weren't happy about, which it seemed like for the most part people weren't. I mean, granted, winning a Super Bowl would help people kind of just be happy with anything. Like that certainly helped. But
Sure.
I think if they lost a Super Bowl and they promoted, like I think that would have been the whole city of Philadelphia might have been burned to the ground. But I think Kevin Patullo, honestly, I feel like he's earned this position, because he's kind of been there through the ups and downs of all these last 4 years, in terms of Shane Steichen, how well he did, and then obviously Brian Johnson, that experiment didn't work out, and then Kellen Moore had a ton of success. He's kind of been the middleman between Nick Sirianni and the offensive coordinators, kind of pulling all the strings behind scenes, either like helping. Obviously, I know his label is just, or it was, pass game coordinator and associate head coach, but he did so much more, and Nick Sirianni kind of went out of his way to praise him. And I know Sirianni kind of praises everybody when he's asked about them, but Patullo, and it's something that I mentioned in the article, he didn't really have a ton of experience with Sirianni before coming to Philadelphia. They were together the last 3 years before Philadelphia, but Shane Steichen actually worked more with Sirianni before coming to Philadelphia than Patullo did. So I think people kind of thought that, oh, Patullo was only getting it because he was his friend or whatever. Like, Shane Steichen only had 1 year as an OC with the Chargers. It wasn't the best year overall. The numbers weren't staggering, but then he was looked at as a god in Philadelphia because he took him to the Super Bowl and kind of helped flip the switch. And people kind of view Patullo the complete opposite, and they're not even really giving him a chance. So I'm just excited to see what he can do in Philadelphia. I think he's kind of been in the weeds this whole time, and now for him to finally get his chance, and it seems like he is going to call plays. I'm really excited to see how he can kind of take what he's learned from all three of the offensive coordinators that he's worked with, all of the other coordinators that he's worked with in the past, guys like Chan Gailey and things like that. And kind of all these 15 years of experience have kind of led to this point and this opportunity for him. So I'm ready to see him kind of take it by the horns and see what he could do.
I am as well. I'm interested in it. I know that people bring up the Brian Johnson, and I've also seen a few comments of, well, hey, Brian Johnson had been a play caller. He was offensive coordinator at Florida. See how that one worked out. But there's still and I think most people understand, there's a big difference of, hey, you had 1 year as an offensive coordinator in college versus doing it in the pro. I mean, the speed, the level of the competition, the game, the way you have to get plays, like everything is drastically different. So it's, for all intents and purposes, I don't really view that. Like, if he had 10 years of OC experience in college, then okay, sure, we could give more of that because he was calling plays for a long. But 1 year, to me, is not as big of a difference as, like you say, with a Kevin Patullo, who's had 15 years in various roles and working with the different organizations, different mindsets, creative thought, all this other stuff. Then he can bring that wealth of knowledge and say, okay, I like this, don't like this, change some things. A.J. Brown, very clearly, I mean, he wasn't holding back, but very clearly was like, hey, I like the move. We have to evolve. We have to change. Kevin's been there through the good and the bad. This is going to be a positive thing. So, I mean, ultimately, if it's good enough for AJ, it's good enough for me. So I like it. I'll just say that. I'm not over the moon about it. I'm not, sky is falling. I said before, I was like, I'm probably a 7 of 10 confidence. I could get more as we get closer, but I'm not freaking out. It's not going to be terrible.
Yeah, I think they'll be just fine. I mean, I said all along that I thought Nate Scheelhaase was like my number one pick, because I really think it would have been better to go with kind of a younger guy, even though you might lose him in a year. I think just bringing in those new ideas and keeping kind of that head coach factory, I guess, at offense coordinator is still a relatively successful like kind of plan to take. But obviously they went in a different direction. It would have been hard to kind of pass over Kevin Patullo for a third time. I mean, that's probably why those reports came out where he was saying, oh, all of a sudden New Orleans was interested in him. I think that was more of a play by his agents to kind of push the Eagles into moving him to offense coordinator. But I also think, like I said, I think he does deserve it.
Yep. And the other one too, we should mention, because people maybe not as familiar with, but the move to get Parks Frazier and add him to the Eagles pass game coordination, because we have, the move from Kevin Patullo opening there is important. I think very notable. You brought this up in at least a couple tweets, but the fact that he's had some, good experience bringing, because another thought is like, oh, well, if it's going to be Sirianni's offense, will there be motion? But tell people maybe not as well aware or insight on Parks Frazier and maybe a change there for the Eagles.
Well, a couple of years ago, Parks Frazier was kind of viewed as like this boy wonder when he was with the Colts and suddenly promoted to like interim offensive coordinator under Jeff Saturday with that whole debacle that didn't really work out as nobody expected that to really work
Yeah.
out. But he was kind of thrusted into action and only 29 years, 30 years old at that time to be an offense coordinator. So their first game with him as the OC, they put up over 400 yards total offense, average 7 yards per play. Then they kind of tailed off throughout the rest of the regular season, but he wasn't really ready for that role yet. And now, even with the Eagles, he is just going to be their pass game coordinator. But I think he's going to bring some fresh concepts into Philadelphia, which is what they really needed. He does have experience with guys like Kevin Patullo, Nick Sirianni, and things like that. So that will help kind of bring their relationship along and kind of work together. But at the same time, he spent all last season with Miami under Mike McDaniel. So obviously that's a team that uses more motion than anybody in the NFL. So maybe he'll kind of bring those principles into Philadelphia. I'm not saying that they're going to utilize a ton of motion now all of a sudden, but just the fact that he does have that influence and that experience, it'll only help kind of bring those things to the offensive meetings.
There you go. I like it. Again, just the diversity of thought, bringing a new mind, creative ideas, things to be able to potentially change the offense. So the players seem to be on board. We won a Super Bowl also, so like you said, I mean, it's not like they're as negative thoughts, I suppose, of coming away from if they had lost and like, oh my gosh, we made these terrible changes. We lost won the Super Bowl. They're fine. We knew there was going to be some sort of changes here. You got guys internal. That's where they decided to go with. Is it a Sirianni move? Is it giving him more trust? Is it Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie were supposedly overseeing the interviews, so they had to give a thumbs up, of course. But how much did they give to Sirianni? Who knows for sure? But I mean, yeah, there's a little more confidence I would expect over hey, it's your Super Bowl winning head coach and organization here. So a little bit different. They learned.
He's going to have that big hefty contract probably coming soon too. So
hey.
Nick Sirianni's feeling good right now about himself.
Yes, as are the Italians, because the Italian coaching staff of the NFL. There you go. You got to love that.
Tommy DeVito as quarterback coach. Here we go. It's coming soon.
You never know. We don't rule it out. We won't put it out there too. Big Dom might be the one with the ultimate say. We look at all these names getting hired, so we'll just put that out there. But the man himself is a legend for a reason. But no, I think lots of other exciting stuff. Obviously, it's great to have several roles filled. There's other to come, naturally for the quarterbacks coach and others. So definitely keep people posted on that side. But again, make sure to follow Anthony at DiBona NFL, and appreciate you coming on as always.
Thanks, man. I'm excited. Get ready for the combine, get ready for free agency, and then obviously the quarterback coach. I mean, I think that's a pretty big hire, so I'm excited to see who they put in there.
There we go. We'll keep you posted as soon as anything happens. Obviously, going live for breaking news and things like that. But let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you agree, disagree, how you feeling about Bryce Huff, all the other moves, potentials for Philly to bring in. Also, like and subscribe as always. And appreciate you guys. As always, go Birds.